When I was a teenager in high school, our school had a foreign exchange student named Pablo from Portugal. Now I got to know Pablo in gym class. We would talk every day when we sat up in the bleachers. Now, Pablo had a thick Portuguese accent. And I noticed as I got to know him better that I too developed a thick Portuguese accent. So why is this? Well, it is because of the interaction adaptation theory. When one person changes their normal communication styles to another, this is their way of coping to gain what the other person needs, wants, and expects in order to reach their goal. People may adapt themselves by matching their personal behaviors and the way they speak like the other person, or they may choose to act in an opposite way. The theorist behind the interactional adaptation theory, or IAT, is Judy Burgoon. She works for the University of Arizona. She is the Director of Human Communication Research for the Center of the Management of Information. Now, Burgoon's IAT theory states it is a theory that helps explain how, when, and why people adapt to another person's verbal and nonverbal communication in a similar or a dissimilar way. So why do we adapt? Well, people have specific needs, expectations, and desires. And IAT states that we as humans adapt our behaviors in order to reach our goals. For instance, you generally don't see frogs going around choking birds. But in this instance, he has a need to survive. So he's giving that bird what for, okay? Let's define needs. Needs are usually biologically driven, and a person who has a need considers them necessary. In this picture, this young boy is obviously hungry. He has a need for food. Under normal circumstances, he might not necessarily want to eat dirty food that's been on the ground, but he's adapted his behavior so that he can eat. Expectations are when someone expects something to happen. Of course, it's based on presumptions of social norms, your past experiences, your perception, and of course just fundamental rules that we play in communication. For example, at Christmas time, children, as well as adults, expect lots of wonderful presents. Now, as adults, we tell children, if you're not good, Santa won't bring you presents, so that they'll adapt their behavior so they'll have lots of presents on Christmas. Desires are fueled by personal preferences for interactions. We base these off of our temperaments, our inclinations, and of course, current social and cultural norms of the present time. Now, everybody has an interactional position or an IP. All that is the normal way that we interact every day. Now, when we interact with other people, we compare our normal behavior to the behavior that we observe in the other person. And we make a judgment. We decide whether we are attracted to their behavior or if we have an aversion to their behavior. And this judgment that we make causes us to adapt our communication when we interact with them. The first type of interaction adaptation is called reciprocity compensation. And this says that if we dislike or we have an aversion to another person's behavior, we're going to resist making that adaptation to this specific set of behaviors. Or we're going to maintain our original IP and not change at all. A second type is convergence mirroring. This is when a person has an attraction to that other person's thoughts, behaviors, and even their appearances in some instances. And what they'll do is they'll adapt to mirror the other person. Divergence mirroring, this is when people have an aversion to the behavior patterns of the other party. So they adapt in a dissimilar way. Take a look at the picture. You'll see the couple fighting in the background. Most likely this young man's parents. He can have a divergent mirroring adaptation because when he gets older, he may remember his parents fighting and arguing, and he may go, I never want to be like that. He has an aversion to that type of behavior. So he may make the proclamation that one day when he gets older, when he and his wife have disagreements, he'll never do it in front of the children. Now, how has IAT been studied? Well, one way IAT has been studied is through cultural differences that we have to make. As immigrants to a new country, these immigrants have to adapt to the new culture. As well, when a person moves to a new place, whether they're a member of the country or the state, there's always going to be a cultural difference, so they have to make adaptations in that instance as well. Not to mention, you've got young adults moving to a new stage of life. For example, teenagers moving into adulthood. It's a brand new culture out there, especially when going to college. In all of these situations, people have to adapt and they have to assimilate to their new surroundings. And IAT was definitely utilized in these instances and held true for these studies. IAT was also tested at school. When you have student and teacher relationships, behaviors change. Students must make adjustments as well as teachers. To maintain control of the class, for example, teachers have to make adjustments. They may get more firm. They may get stricter, more authoritative. Also, in order to get more or less student participation, the teacher will have to adapt her behavior, which in turn will change the student's behavior. It was found during this study that the student-teacher interaction relationship was transactional and that both involved mutual influence and both parties were responsible for the outcomes in the classroom. And finally, I found that IAT was tested in marriage relationships. We know as a married couple, when you come into the relationship, that individuals have their very own wants, needs, and relationships. And in order for them to be happy, they have to make adaptations. Now, the IAT theory works in predicting outcomes in close relationships most of the time. However, research was limited on the subject of affection. The reason being was at times there were benefits of giving affection as opposed to receiving it. And it wasn't always conclusive. Some weaknesses of the IAT theory is that, of course, there are some limits to widespread interaction patterns because individual preferences, experiences, people's different personalities are not always the same. It's not always going to be easy to predict what a person in fact will do. Factors that affect behaviors might include age, gender, perceptions, locations, or even the nature of the relationships of the persons interacting. If you'll take a look at the two pictures, you'll notice the young man has no problem dealing with the fish. However, the young lady doesn't seem to like it too much. We don't know if it's because of the difference of gender, their perception. It might be a little of both. At any rate, you can't always predict how someone's going to react in certain situations and how they're going to behave in specific communication interactions. The strengths of IAT. Overall, IAT does have reliable results when tested. General predictable behaviors and adaptations can be found due to societal norms, biological norms, routine communication exchanges, as well as mutual communication exchanges. For example, you'll notice at the supermarket here, this is an example of a routine exchange. When the clerk smiles and says thank you, in turn, the customer will smile and say thank you back. That is known as a routine exchange. Pretty predictable. Now here in the second picture, we have a mutual exchange. Two coworkers looking at the computer. When one coworker laughs, the other one is inclined to laugh as well. Another predictable behavior that was tested through IAT. Now, my biblical perspective on IAT was that the use of IAT was definitely in the Bible in several instances, but one specific example I found was the story of Solomon, when God had warned him not to take so many wives, because he knew that if he took a wife that was not fully committed to him, that Solomon might indeed change his behavior and do it in such a way that he would mirror his new wives. And in fact, that is what happened. In 1 Kings 11:4, it says, "For it came to pass, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods. And his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father." So we definitely see that IAT is a theory that could definitely be used to say situations in the Bible were true. My conclusions on the IAT theory is that it is overall a reliable theory that predicts why and how humans adapt their behaviors to meet their needs, their wants, and their expectations during communication interactions. So perhaps if one day you develop a thick Portuguese accent and you don't know why, you can simply blame it on IAT.